I think self-reliance or trying to be a self-reliant entrepreneur is really an admission that your life is a work in progress and that we kind of have to show up and do something every day. I think it's become very common practice for entrepreneurs. All I know is entrepreneurs, but maybe for everybody to kind of have a morning ritual where you really get your day started, you kind of center yourself, you take in something really positive, whether affirmations or some sort of reading or something that, really get yourself on the right track. Because let's face it, once you go out the door, the world starts smacking you around.
It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is best-selling author John Jantsch, and we're going to be discussing his brand new book, The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, 366 Daily Meditations to Feed Your Soul and Grow Your Business. John, welcome to the show.
So happy to be here. Thanks.
This is your first time on my show, so we're going to begin the same place I begin with all of the new authors I'm talking to. So let's start with a bit of the John Jantsch origin story. So for the listeners, the viewers, people encountering you for the very first time, they have no context for you. What are a few things they absolutely have to know about you? I feel like I've known you for a long time, but I know you're going to be new to some of the folks listening.
Well, shall I start in second grade then?
You could. Up to you. The origin story has no boundaries of time.
Well, I'll just start with my entrepreneurial origin story. I've actually owned my own business coming up on 30 years now. Like a lot of people, I started it without any real plan. I knew I could hustle work. I'd worked for an ad agency for about 5 years right out of college. So I just started getting business and building a marketing consulting firm. But pretty quickly, a few years in at least, realized I loved working with small business owners, but they were proving very difficult to work with because no attention span, no budget, same problems. So I actually decided, if I wanted to work with small business owners, I was going to have to figure out a way to walk in and say, here's what I do, here's what you do, here's what we hope to get out of that, and here's what it costs. And to my delight, what I learned was, in trying to solve my greatest frustration, I think I tapped into what is still today one of the greatest frustrations with small business owners. It's really hard and getting harder to buy marketing services as a business because everybody's selling a piece of the puzzle. And so this idea that I had created a system, and by the way, that's when I gave it a name, duct tape marketing, because I figured I had to have more of a product-y kind of name. So I built my practice that way. I started writing about it. It was about the time when blogs started and people were really, jumping online. It attracted small business owners. This idea, it attracted a publisher. So I wrote a book called Duct Tape Marketing, and now I have a network of independent marketing consultants around the world that actually install the duct tape marketing system. And today, I think we're going to talk about my sixth book. So it's as fast as I can tell my story.
That was a very rapid-paced but appropriately detailed origin story, so great job. Next, let's get into what you might call the story behind the book. I'm always curious, when an author sets out on a writing journey, they've seen a need in their own life, seen a need in kind of the culture, the tribe, the space that they're a part of, so I'm curious what motivated you to invest all the time that goes into creating a book like this, because this is a different journey, it's a different style of book, so what problem are you trying to fix?
So it is my sixth book. My first 5 books have been squarely about some aspect of marketing. I myself have been on I started my business, I said 30 years ago. About 10 years into it, I realized I needed to have a purpose in life and with my business. And so I've been on a kind of personal development journey myself, probably about the time I turned 30, I think, like a lot of people do. And really this book, in some ways, I feel like I've spent my entire career telling people how to do things in marketing. And I wanted to write something more about the mindset shift that I think we need as entrepreneurs, or at least the medicine that we need as entrepreneurs, to keep coming at it every day. And so the book I wrote is much more of a why to book. And it's kind of, in some ways, it's like, I think a lot of authors, it's kind of the book I wanted to read. You will see from a stylistic standpoint, all my other books, very much first person. I think you should do this. In this book, there's no first person singular, at least. It's we and us, because I felt like I was a member of the audience. And so in a lot of ways, I wrote the book that I maybe wish I had 20 years ago.
Next, I'd love to have you introduce us to, say, some of the voices that we're going to encounter throughout the book. Talk to us about some of the, like maybe why you chose these people, but what were the themes that you saw in their lives and their writing that showed maybe how they were the entrepreneurs, the rebels, maybe the boundary pushers of their day? I kind of felt like there were some specific reasons you chose the people you chose, and they're folks who their thoughts are going to be relevant for us today.
Maybe I need to start by setting up kind of the way the book's structured. It is a daily book. In other words, it follows a calendar, January 1st through December 31st, 366, including a leap year day in there. So every day you get a single thought, a single page. Every page is anchored by some work of literature from the mid-19th century. It all fits into about a 40-year band in the mid-19th century, and then about 100, 150 words of me, maybe contextualizing it for today's entrepreneur. And then I leave you every day with what I call a challenge question. So it hopefully makes you think and makes you work a little bit each day for, a couple minutes a day. Now, in terms of why I chose who I chose, I've been a big fan of Thoreau and Emerson, which are names that most entrepreneurs recognize. You'll see a lot of Pinterest boards with quotes from those folks. And so I wanted to start somewhere with, some sort of unifying kind of text. So when I dove into most of the literature that was written around the time that Thoreau and Emerson published most of their work, I found there really was this sort of counterculture, period that went on in literature. It went in a lot of ways: social reform, religious reform, political reform. If you think about what was going on in the mid-19th century, we were on the cusp of the Civil War. Women were marching in the streets to get the right to vote. We were trying to abolish slavery. So it was the first time in literature that I think you started to see the emergence of this theme of self-reliance. Ralph Waldo Emerson actually had a very famous essay by that name. But what happened was, when I dug in a little bit, it made me realize also that a lot of the protagonists in even the fiction that was written in that period, it was the first time you saw this Tom Sawyer and Joe March and, in Scarlet Letter and in Moby Dick. You started seeing all these books that we were asked to read in high school and college had kind of this thread that ran through them where a protagonist was very self-reliant as well. And so after I started reading and then getting deeper and unearthing some voices that, particularly female voices that didn't get a lot of publicity given the time, I really felt like this was the anchor, for this book, that I could put together really what I think is some of the best entrepreneurial writing still today, and come up with 366 individual entries that would work for the various themes that I organized the book around.
Let's go to format for a second, because you kind of talked about the layout earlier. Why the single page daily reading? Was that more of a matter of time commitment that you're asking for from the reader, or was that partly also to stay very focused on a topic? Like, why did you go with that format?
I wanted to present a book that I actually think is more of a practice than a book. And so you're not going to pick this up and read it and go, well, I knocked off that self-reliance stuff, I can move on to the next topic. I think self-reliance, or trying to be a self-reliant entrepreneur, is really an admission that your life is a work in progress, and that we kind of have to show up and do something every day. I think it's become very common practice for entrepreneurs. All I know is entrepreneurs, but maybe for everybody, to kind of have a morning ritual where you really get your day started, you kind of center yourself, you take in something really positive, whether affirmations or some sort of reading or something that, really get yourself on the right track. Because let's face it, once you go out the door, the world starts smacking you around, particularly as a business owner or an entrepreneur. And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs have really kind of adopted this practice of trying to do something, whether it's morning or evening or both, to really kind of make sure that they stay on course with following their dream. And so I think a book in this format would fit very well into people, particularly people who already have some sort of a routine. I tell you the other thing that I found, and I'm not sure I knew this going in, but I'm hearing this now from people, is it's also a great way to sort of facilitate conversations, say with a team or with clients, that really kind of allow you to get into some deeper stuff, not just the surfacey stuff sometimes. About the human condition and about, what we believe and what our goals are and how we've come to trust ourselves more. These are conversations that we probably need to be having, I think, in the world today, to maybe develop a little more empathy, a little more coming together. And frankly, I go off on a tangent here, but I think entrepreneurs have always been some of the best medicine for the world. We're typically trying to right wrongs and change things and get rid of things that are inconvenient. So I think that entrepreneurs have just always been really positive change makers.
What I find refreshing, I guess I would say, about this book, we have this entrepreneurial culture that's very much been about hustle and drive and just push, push, push. And that seems really appealing when you're starting out. But if we're always doing and we fail to be in a place where we're being and resting, like I feel like we run out of gas very quickly if we're always doing. Was that maybe somewhat in your mind to kind of bring a little bit of balance for the entrepreneurial life?
It is for me. Let's put it that way. I mean, buyer beware. If you get this book, you're going to get a lot of what I believe. And I think, yes, we are driven to distraction today. And it's not just the technology, it's the human condition. I mean, I think that we need to slow down. We need to be more mindful. We need to do things that it pains me to see. I think owning a business is the most awesome, freeing thing in the world. And it pains me to see how many entrepreneurs are getting the life sucked out of them. And it's not joyful and happy like it should be. And I think a lot of it is that kind of hustle and grind kind of mentality that unfortunately sometimes leads you to just hustle for hustle's sake, as opposed to maybe taking everything in and going, oh, this is what fate meant for me, as opposed to I'm just going to put my head down and run through the wall.
At the end of the day, whether it's your entrepreneurial gig, your business, why you're doing a podcast, why you're doing anything, if you lose that aspect of what made it fun in the first place, you're going to burn out. You're going to fall out of love with it and find something else to do. So,
yeah, it's hard. It's going to be hard. There are going to be days that are no fun. And you're absolutely right. If you don't have some connection to the impact that you're making by doing what you're doing, then you're going to give up before you probably reach where you're trying to go, or before enough people are helped, by the fact that you're doing what you're doing.
Let's get back into a little bit more about how the book is organized. I was kind of intrigued that you organize this around what you might call the seasons of the entrepreneur. And I'm kind of curious. It's almost like let's say if somebody goes through this every single year, which I think is kind of the hope that you might go through this a few times, you're sort of introducing this annual rhythm into the life of an entrepreneur. So I'm curious, what were you hoping to cultivate in the life of an entrepreneur as they go through the book? Because you've got planning, discovering, evolving, growing. I'm thinking if you go through that several years in a row, you're going to have certain times of the year where you're really going to be pressing in on some specific areas.
I think there's a couple things going on. First off, I was really just observing my own journey. And it's not like an annual thing. Obviously, the annual metaphor is there for the taking because of the way the book is designed. But I think there's a continual evolution of the seasons of an entrepreneur. Every time you start a new thing, you grow a certain way. It's kind of like that we're repeating these cycles over and over again. And the first one is really this idea of kind of trusting yourself enough in what you're doing. You have to get comfortable enough to go, you know what? This is who I am. This is where I'm going. I don't care what anybody says. This is what I've got to do. And I think that from that place, the next season really for me is then you start experimenting and you start experiencing things. And I think that's really when you find the purpose in what you're doing. It's not because you sat in a room and said, this will be a good purpose. It's by experiencing things. And then typically kind of the fall, if you want to go with the metaphor, that's where failure starts to show up. And it's not always failure, but that's when resistance and things start not working exactly as you thought they were going to. And really the most successful entrepreneurs are just resilient enough to be able to kind of frame each of those experiences as a learning experience as opposed to failure. And then eventually I think you get through that and you do start. And some people start this earlier, but I do think that as you go through those 3 seasons as I just described, then you start kind of thinking, I believe, about the impact that what you're doing is having, who's being helped by what it is that you're doing. And again, as I said, those often kind of repeat at different phases. I mean, I've been doing this 30 years and I've certainly gone through those phases a dozen times easily as I've evolved, as the market has changed, as some new opportunity presented itself. I mean, I started my business, we weren't using the internet. So take that, And I say that kiddingly to audiences of millennials particularly, and you could tell the blank stares. They're like, how did you sell anything? How did you do that? That I think is what keeps this fun for me. That's what makes it feel refreshing. A lot of people do ask me, gosh, you've been doing, how do you stay, energized? But I think it's, whether I know it or not, it's kind of the passing through those hurdles or those gates in the seasons that really allows me to feel like this is still a brand new game to me. From a practical standpoint, I also wanted to give the book a little bit of a narrative arc, as opposed to just being here's a splattering of 366 entries. So I further gave each month a theme, a one-word theme like resilience or failure or impact, to kind of organize the readings in particular. As you might imagine, the research that went into finding the 400 plus readings that I sourced and eventually curated into the book, it started as a bit of a treasure hunt. And then I realized I need a map. And so I organized the seasons and then I organized the month. And that actually allowed me to go out and find the readings as opposed to just reading everything and going, oh, that one sounds good.
Let's talk now about what's the promise in there for the reader on a practical level. They undertake this journey. How is this going to help them develop their business's brand purpose? I feel like you rightly said earlier, maybe you start to realize you have some need in this area when you hit your 30s, you get a ways into your business. I feel like that's where you realize, gosh, I don't know everything I needed to know, or I can't just drive harder. I actually have to slow down and think and learn. I undertake this journey. How is it going to help me build my business's brand purpose?
Most businesses, I mean, if you're Procter and Gamble and you've got divisions and you've got, products that are brands on their own, that's a different type of brand. Most businesses, most small businesses, I mean, the brand is really you. It's the founder, it's the people, it's who you're being, because that's what most people interact with in a small business. So to me, I think we spend so much time working on like, how do I do this stuff? But I think that what I'm suggesting in this book is that if we commit to working on ourselves, that alone, I think, is going to allow you to build a better brand promise. One of the people who blurbed the book, probably some of your listeners know, is Jay Baer, another author. And he said this beautifully. This book is your guide on a journey of staggering depth to learn a crucial lesson. A better you makes a better business. And I think that that's absolutely true, but it's also the part that we often forget about.
I liked what you said earlier about millennials kind of looking at you funny when you talk about a time when there was no internet. I remember getting email for the first time at college in 1995, and we actually downloaded our emails oddly to a floppy disk to save server space, which again, people that are younger just have no clue what that world is like. But I'm kind of curious how different generations are responding to the message in the book, because we're at a time when there are all these multiple generations in the workforce, multiple generations out there doing entrepreneurial things. I feel like the age limit or age cap on starting something, growing something new has kind of dissipated at this point. When we see people in all seasons of life doing really interesting things, how are boomers responding to this book versus the Gen Xers and millennials? I'm a Gen Xer. I totally get this. I feel like my millennial friends will totally gravitate towards this. So how do you think people are going to respond, or how have they already been responding?
Yeah. So as I was starting to write the book, this book was such a departure for me. I did like some authors do, and I sent out some really early ideas to a bunch of people. I wanted somebody to say, what are you thinking? Or, stop now, if that was going to be the case. And so I did get some early response, and I did send it to a variety of ages. And, as you noted, I mean, 50 and 60-year-olds, fastest growing age group that's starting businesses right now. And what I seem to find from folks in that age group is that there's kind of this sense of maybe what I've done up to date, hasn't been as meaningful. And I want to do this next thing that's actually going to be my legacy, or, is going to actually be something that for me is more meaningful than what I did the last 25 years or something, at an investment desk or, whatever it was that I did. And a lot of the Gen X, folks, as you said, millennials, I think have a whole completely different relationship with what work even is. They're not thinking about going to that investment desk for 25 years. They're thinking about, how do I line up a series of things that are adventures, that are experiments maybe, that are fun. And I think this kind of book gives them a little bit of this, you got that, you can do this. That at least has been how people have been kind of sharing with me how they're experiencing this book.
I think the different generations, we're each going to read what we need into what we're seeing in the book. I also feel like with the younger generations, when we're talking Gen Xers or millennials or even the Gen Zs who are coming up in the workforce right now, I feel like some of us in those younger three generations, we missed out on some practical mentoring a lot of times. So I feel like books like this give us some real principles and things to kind of start living our life around, things that maybe weren't necessarily instilled from parents or grandparents, things that were lost with some of these younger generations. So it meets some different needs depending on the group we're talking about.
And that's why I love the writing in this book that I drew from for inspiration is 150 years old. It's still so incredibly relevant today because even though we have all this technology and all these new distractions, I mean, the human condition hasn't changed. And so what we need to go to work on, how we need to have the right mindset, it doesn't really matter what era we're living in. I think it still exists. You know, one of the things we haven't done, Shaun, that maybe we ought to do, we've been talking about the concept of the book. Maybe I ought to read a page.
Yeah, please. Pick your favorite page, John.
You know what I did? I turned to, you and I are recording this on November 12th. So I just turned to November 12th.
I actually read that reading earlier. I was like, I should see what today says as I was getting ready for the interview.
Or we could read your birthday.
Yeah, let's go to my birthday, January 27th. I'll turn there as well so I can follow along.
January 27th. Oh, it's a good one. They're all good. Sorry. All right. So bear with me. It takes about 2 minutes. And let's see what we found today. So every day starts with a title, then a reading from, this one happens to be actually from Emerson's Self-Reliance, and then 150 words from me, and then a question. All right. So today, January 27th, Shaun's birthday. Gratefully uncomfortable. The power which resides in us is new in nature, and none but we know what that is which we can do, nor do we know until we have tried. Not for nothing, one face, one character, one fact makes much impression on us, and another none. It is not without pre-established harmony, this sculpture in the memory. The eye was placed where one ray should fall, that it might testify of that particular ray. That's Ralph Waldo Emerson from Self-Reliance, 1841. Comfort may indeed be one of the greatest adversaries of the entrepreneur. The moment we begin to feel we deserve something, get used to things being a certain way, or expect to be treated as though we are more important than another, is the moment we start to fade. Entitlement creates stagnation and constrains the flow of nature in our lives. You might actually play with this idea and find occasions to make yourself uncomfortable. It's not so much about being uncomfortable as it is about being comfortable with how it makes you feel. You can do something very simple, like take a new way home, or something slightly more complex, like present a new idea to a room full of people you don't know. Look for instances that make you irritated and observe why you're feeling this way. Travel is a great everyday irritant for some and presents a great opportunity for witnessing and accepting inconvenience in a gracious manner. We take so much for granted when we strive to achieve that we forget just how great we have it. You're always in charge of the moments you choose to think, feel, and act about something. And true self-reliance means accepting almost everything as neither good or bad. Your challenge question today: when is the last time you gracefully accepted being uncomfortable?
What I love about that is everybody's going to read their own situation into that. Like, I'll actually give an answer to that question for the sake of the interview. So a couple of months ago, I had an opportunity to go spend time with 3 authors that I work with very closely. And it was a ministry event at a predominantly African-American church. And I was the only Caucasian person in the whole place. I wouldn't say I was uncomfortable. It was just a new experience. It's like, oh my gosh, this is the first time I've ever been the only white guy in a room. I was like, this is how this feels. This is a good growing, stretching experience for me. So I was grateful for the experience, but I'd just never been in a situation like that before.
I think we definitely, as Caucasian males, rarely find ourselves in the minority in any situation. And so, yeah, I think that's powerful.
No, that was a memorable experience. So thank you for suggesting we preview one of the it's sort of a chapter, one of the readings, and how fun that it was the one. I know what I get to read on my birthday next year.
That's right. And what's funny is I can almost guarantee you'll be a different person on January 27th, 2020. I mean, that reading may, in fact, mean something very different to you in subsequent years.
I can guarantee I will throw myself into more uncomfortable situations before then. So my answer will change by then. I'm very certain of that. I've interviewed hundreds of authors, and I know every writing journey is a different experience. And so 2 things. With this book, I'm curious, what did you learn in the writing process? Because it was a different research and writing journey. And then how did it change you, either as an author or as an entrepreneur? Because drawing from this much wisdom, I don't know how you couldn't help but be changed, because you likely encountered things you had never read or seen before.
Yeah, it was very much so. I mean, my previous books, a lot of what I was doing was just saying, hey, here's what I do. It worked for me. You might try it. And I was really just kind of recounting, what I had done. This book had a tremendous amount of research, just diving into and collecting and curating the works that I wanted to share. And then, another 6 months of just really intense writing. And as I'm sure many of your author friends will tell you, it's actually much harder to write short passages than it is to write longer ones. And so the process as a writer, I think, actually was very hard, was very rigorous, but I think I probably improved my writing because of it. But as far as an entrepreneur or a thinker or a human being, there's no question. I mean, I spent a year just immersed in thinking about these topics and sharing very personally. I mean, there's people who know me well, my wife, can read these and know what I was talking about as it pertained to me. There's no question. Some of these are telltales. I mean, places where I've fallen down and places where I need work. And so, writing about that kind of stuff, it was like intense journaling. And I will say that it had me reflecting on my life as an entrepreneur and how I define success, probably is a little different than it was a year ago. And I find that it not that it was really waning, but it really kind of rekindled my joy and happiness in my work, or at least how I look at it. It's like nothing changed except for the way that I view it.
It's a spectacular contribution to helping us younger and up and coming still entrepreneurs. And I think even entrepreneurs who have been on the journey as long as you have and longer, like we said earlier, everybody's going to read something different as they encounter the pages of this book. Like you said, when I hit my birthday in 2020, I'll probably have some other weird, uncomfortable situation I've thrown myself into. John, in terms of people wanting to find out more about the book, find out more about you in general, I know you've got a podcast and different things. So where are some of the places we can encounter you online, and then where can we find out more about the book?
Yeah, so pretty much all of the work I've done over the last couple decades can be found at ducttapemarketing.com, and that's DUCTTAPE marketing.com. It's also the name of my first book. This book, The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, can just be found at selfreliantentrepreneur.com. And then, of course, it can be acquired anywhere that you like to buy books.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, a range of places where you can connect with John online, and also some places where you can pick up your own copy of the book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with John Jantsch. Once again, our book today was The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, 366 Daily Meditations to Feed Your Soul and Grow Your Business. Again, a great place to start if you'd like to connect with John and find out more is going to be his website. Once again, that's at ducttapemarketing.com. Or if you want to go directly to information about the book, head on over to selfreliantentrepreneur.com. And John, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's been a great pleasure and an honor to have you on the show.
Thanks, Shaun. It was fun.